Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Logistics Executive TV. Today, I am joined by a legend of the logistics supply chain and transport industry who is joining us today from UK, Professor John Manners-Bell. John, thanks so much for joining us and welcome.
It's great to be here with you, Kim, again after a few years, I believe.
It has been, and the last time I saw you was in London itself, I think. So at one of your events. But let me give a bit of an intro for the folks who are in the meeting today, John. So really, it's been quite a long history for you. You're a fellow of the UK Institute of Logistics and Transport. You're the chair of Supply Chain Logistics Global Advisory Council of the World Economic Forum, where you have been. You've advised the European Commission Directorate General for Energy and Transport. You've written 3 books on the industry, as many thousands of articles, but Global Logistics Strategies Delivering the Goods, Supply Chain Risk, Understanding Emerging Threats to Global Supply Chains, and Logistics and Supply Chains in Emerging Markets, which I've got a copy of just over here. Your book, The Supply Chain Risk, won the mention spéciale at ACA Rule Prize for the Supply Chain Literature Awards in 2014. You are also, as I've got a lot of knowledge of and dealing with you over the years, the Chief Executive of Transport Intelligence, a global research and industry investigation organisation. You've honorary visiting professor of London Metropolitan University of Guildhall, Faculty of Business and Law, and you're an advisor, as I said, to the World Economic Forum. So it's you're a busy guy, John.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, that introduction makes me also feel very old.
Still keeping the good looks. They're very good. Yeah. So look, today we're going to talk about your latest book, The Death of Globalization. And I've yet to read it, but I've been reading some of the reviews, doing some of the homework. But rather than me talk about it, perhaps you can give us a bit of an idea in terms of the premise for this book, and we'll lead into a few things I'd love to hear more about the book itself.
Yeah, thanks, Kim, for the introduction. Look, I think when we were all, I mentioned a bit about age, but I certainly during the 80s and 90s, as I was sort of growing up and in the logistics industry, we were always taught about the theoretical, the concepts of supply chain management, driving down inventory. They were all commercial based. Everything revolved around logistics theory and just in time and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's not been the case over the last 10 years. I think since the Great Recession and even a few years before that, what we're seeing is that economics as the driving force behind logistics strategy is being replaced by politics and ideology. And really that is coming to dominate now the environment in which we're working. First of all, it came about due to the offshoring. What was happening during the 90s and 2000s was obviously a huge amount of manufacturing that's being offshored from Europe and the US to Asia. And really, I think the electorate in Europe and US think, well, we were told a bit of a lie because we were told that everything would be great and everyone would be better off. But of course, there are large parts of society who were just left behind, the long-term unemployed, the lack of training, the poverty, which is now endemic in parts of these parts of the Western world, and that's led to what's been called the democratic deficit. So people no longer trust their politicians. So on one side of things, we have the sort of domestic policies which have been driving the election of President Trump, also Brexit. You've seen a lot of parties in Europe and on the right wing either get into power or take a large amount of the popular vote. Mm-hmm. At the same time as that, on the geopolitical side, we've seen the rise of China. Obviously, China joined the WTO in 2001, and that was the real springboard for its success. And I think everybody in the West thought, well, that's great. We'll have China and countries like it joining the sort of Western paradigm. and they'll get a taste for all these riches, and the next thing they know, they'll be lovely Western democracies just like us. Of course, that was completely naive, and it was never going to happen. And it's ended up in the disastrous situation where now we have this sort of standoff between the US and China, and countries within China's what's called Sinosphere, Belt and Road Initiative countries, one side, and the US trying to align with the sort of Western with its Western allies on the other, leading to things such as friendshoring and talk about so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But that combined with issues over sustainability, where very few people think that global value chains are good for the environment, ethics, not just in China with the Uyghur community, but if you look at where all the critical raw materials for a large number of electronic products come from, i.e. from Congo or from Africa, there's a lot of big question marks over the conditions in which workers are employed there. So you have a concatenation of all these. You have the sustainability, you have the ethics, you have the domestic politics, you have geopolitical pressures, and now that is leading to some real big supply chain challenges and changes.
Yep. So you identify in the book what these key drivers are. Talk to us a little bit more how we really ended up getting into this situation.
Well, I think what we've seen that from 2001 onwards, from when China joined the WTO, we've seen a change in the balance of power in the world, and it's not a bad thing, that's for sure. And it's led to millions, if not hundreds of millions of people in China being lifted out of poverty throughout the whole emerging world as well. It has led to many of the benefits which people were talking about, by the integration of emerging markets with with global systems. Fantastic. But at the same time as that, these countries, China specifically, but you can look at, say, Turkey or Saudi Arabia, they've all been following their own domestic political agenda, which hasn't necessarily aligned with the Western political agenda, and surprise. Yeah, exactly. And this is creating real conflict now. I mean, if you look at the high-tech sector, you'll see that the US and its allies are really worried that the Chinese government is building sort of backdoor access into electronic components for the 5G rollout networks in the West. At the same time as that, people are worried that Western technologies are sort of bleeding from the commercial world into the military in China to actually provide China with these military capabilities, which will then be used against the West. So that's these borders, these frictions and border controls are being created now to try and cut off China from the rest of the world. But of course, it's a busted flush. It's too late. It's too late for that now. That the cat is out of the bag. There's no way that we're going to be able to control China's growth, either economically or militarily. So, and that's why these big frictions, these big geopolitical frictions, are developing.
Really interesting. And of course, we hear a lot now and see on all of the socials, and the business ones in particular. A lot on LinkedIn, some on TikTok as well, of course. But we hear a lot about how the fact that technology in itself is being weaponized, and you mentioned the resource issue and the scarcity of resources. You're seeing graphs all the time of where all the resources are, who's got control of what in what countries, cross borders. Is technology now being weaponized in regards to not only business but politics as well, geopolitics as well?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think you only have to look at Taiwan. I think that's the best example. Obviously, I mean, Taiwan, in terms of its advanced semiconductor chip manufacturing industry, leads the world. And but of course, it's the China's ambitions to take back Taiwan are going to bring it very quickly into conflicts with the US, and we've already seen these tensions rise and rise over the last few years. And that's led to the US and Europe really start to invest billions in trying to create their own advanced semiconductor manufacturing capabilities. But of course, it will take billions, and that's that ambition is naive as hoping that China would have become a nice social democracy, over because the chip supply chain is completely globalized, and it was taken 20, 30 years to build up Taiwan's own capabilities. And to say that Europe's going to do that or US is going to do that in a matter of years is again, just not going to happen. Yeah, it's looking at supply chain risk as a whole. That will be, I think, the overwhelming characteristic of the development of supply chain over the next decade, and these risks such as political risk or military risks in terms of Taiwan's, well, that's going to play a hugely important role.
So I guess this sort of leads into friend sourcing now as well. As we've had nearshoring, and now the buzzword is about friend sourcing. I mean, is this really catching on? And can you explain what friend sourcing is?
Yeah, exactly. It's the idea that for not all sectors, but for many sectors which are seen as strategic by Western governments, that they should be encouraging their companies based within their own borders to align with suppliers which are based in its neighbouring countries, or countries which share the same political ideals or ideology. So we will see the US is obviously reaching out to its European partners, but also to Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, to try and build up these networks, these structures in which there isn't so much risk in terms of technologies bleeding into adversaries such as Russia or China. But of course, the difficulty of this is that a lot of countries are non-aligned. So if you look at India, for example, I think the Indian Prime Minister has been visiting US in the last few days, also as they try to build better links. But India is very good at playing, has had since the 1950s, since independence, it's always played the game of being a non-aligned country. It's not a friend of China. But on the other hand, it's not going to align itself with the West, as we've seen after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And India has become one of the biggest consumers of Russian oil. So, exactly. So it's got its own policies which it will pursue. And if you look at Latin America. Latin American countries have taken a hell of a lot of money from China. So they're not going to turn around now and say, well, just because the US says, oh, we don't want you dealing with China because they're a security risk.
Exactly.
It's already too late. China has already invested billions in these markets through, and loaned a lot of these governments large amounts of money. Yeah. They're already integrated now with China. And so it's not going to be easy for the US to turn around and say, well, we don't want you to trade with China anymore, please, because we see them as a security risk. What's in it for these countries? You can see the benefits of them wanting to deal with China because they get a large check out of it, even though that check will come with strings attached eventually, as they'll see, because the Chinese will want a piece of their government, and they're already sort of starting to politically leverage countries which they've made loans to. Yeah. But money talks.
Yeah. I guess what I'd be interested to hear from you as a quick response is the apparent complexity of geopolitics these days, and with the effects on supply chains, are things that much more complex these days? Is there that much more dynamism in geopolitics, or are we just hearing about it a lot more and a lot faster because of the platforms that we've got to have immediate information available to us?
Yeah, no, well, I think it's probably a bit of both, but certainly the world is far more complex and fragmented than it has been for many, many years. I mean, if you look at throughout the sort of 1950s and 60s, throughout the Cold War, things were, fairly simple. They, on one side, you had the Soviet Union, the Iron Curtain. On the other, you had NATO and its allies, and that's really characterized politics, but also to a large extent trade as well. But over the 60s and 70s, as there was increasingly a liberalization and an opening up of markets, which was largely due to organizations such as the World Trade Organization, for example, then we all were looking towards, and there were some sort of, I suppose, epoch characterizing books such as the End of History and the world is flat. So two great books of their time, suggesting that this is it. We've reached the point where after the Berlin Wall fell, that this was a victory for Western democratic ideals and also free markets. And when China joined the WTO in 2001, that was seen as vindicating that stance. Everything that's happened since then has gone counter to that. And so therefore, that's why we're now seeing this huge levels of complexity. The US is no longer the only superpower in the world. And with China really likely to become the biggest economy at some point in the next 10 years. I can't remember when it is, but it has huge political clout. It has huge economic clout, and soon, it's building its military clout as well. So, so we're seeing now this sort of rush to rebuild these, the friend sourcing or ally shoring or whatever we want to call it, in order to build competing supply chains.
Well, I could certainly sit here for hours and listen to your insights and observations, John, but I've got to crack on. And at the end of the day, I'd like to talk to you again for the end of the year because things are changing so dramatically. So if you'd be up for that, I'd love to do that. But just getting back to the book again before we wrap, you talk about fragmentation and supply chains. What effect is sustainability? Where does sustainability play in all of this? Because through the last few years, the pandemic and what have you, a lot of that sustainability went for a lot of organisations just had to go as a secondary issue. What are we seeing now in terms of the impact of sustainability on supply chains? Positive, negative? How are you looking at it?
Yeah, well, it's multi-layered. It's complex as everything is, Kim, obviously. But in one level, we're seeing the blocks such as the European Union, but be followed by the US. There's great concerns. We come back to the point about offshoring and outsourcing, because a lot of manufacturing and a lot of heavy industry has been offshored from Europe to emerging markets, to China. And there is great concern that the environmental standards now in those places where the manufacturing has been offshored to are lower than they would have been if they're in Europe. So therefore, it has created unfair competition in a lot of cases when a lot of these companies are now able to export goods which were produced originally to higher standards, higher environmental standards in Europe, but now they're being able to be exported back into Europe at lower costs, which is unfair competition for existing manufacturers. So the European Union has taken the approach that, well, we're going to be putting up more barriers. We're going to try and level the playing field by increasing the tariffs or placing a levy on goods, which to stop this carbon leakage, as it's called. So that's one area where there will be more tariffs going up, which of course is upsetting people in China. It's upsetting people in companies in the US as well, because they'll be dragged into it as well. So it's just another example of, you can set out with sort of really good intentions, but those intentions result in more protectionism, more barriers, etc. And of course, on top of that, you have from the other end of the spectrum, you have the lobbyists who believe the global value chains are bad overall anyway, because they can point to examples where products are processed in one country, moved to another as an intermediate input, and more value takes, and then they're moved around, so they can travel around the world before assembly at another location, and then being moved halfway around the world back into the West. And so, of course, in terms of the carbon emissions, there's a lot of question marks over global value chains, which have yet to be answered.
Maybe we should be calling that the dark chain. It's a new phrase from today. Because there's so much going on. We've got dark kitchens. Now we need, which have the same similar effect. Not too sure where you're getting the food from, but it's got the brand on it. Whereas, dark chains certainly are an element in today's value chain right across the board. John, absolutely enlightening, and really appreciate you talking to us. Before I let you go, now, we'll talk about the book for a second and where people can get hold of you. Just up here, we can see where people can tag you on the book and order the book. They can also get hold of you. If you can just tell us what the best places are to get hold of you, I suppose LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Find me on LinkedIn. I've got fairly unique names, so it's not difficult to find me. I'm on LinkedIn, on Twitter as well. So
we can see the name. Yeah, very good. And also Transport Intelligence, which is you've been going now for well over 20 years since we started interfacing with you on the research that you do all around the world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Before I let you go, I just want you to give us a very brief heads up on the latest organisation, which I believe you're a founder or a co-founder. Tell us about that, because there's some people all around the world that I know that are sitting on the board of that organisation, which looks really interesting.
Yeah, the Foundation for Future Supply Chain. It's a not-for-profit organisation which was set up a couple of years. We've got a strategic advisory board, which is advising us on key topics. What we're looking at is sort of the I suppose, really high-level issues which are impacting upon these logistics and supply chain industry. So not only risk, we've talked a little bit about sustainability. Obviously, that's a huge impact. Gender diversity. We published a report quite recently on how we can encourage more women into the industry, particularly into the transport side of that sector, and the economic as well as the ethical reasons behind that. So we cover many of these sort of really, really big issues which don't seem to get mentioned elsewhere. But we're certainly there undertaking research and publishing reports on some of them.
And some of the people that are on the board of that organisation?
Yeah, we have Mark Miller, who I guess you'll know, and Alan McKinnon, Alan Braithwaite as well. So we have a mix of leading academics, but also a lot of practitioners as well. So we get this sort of a real mix of people, people from the technologies sector. Ken Lyon, for example, he's advises us on digitalization of markets and artificial intelligence, which is an enormous subject in its own right at the moment.
Fantastic. So, John, thanks so much again for joining us. John Manners-Bell, author, leader, teacher, sort of thought leader around the world over the last 20, 30, 40 years, I guess. An absolute legend in the industry, and always a pleasure to talk to you, John. Thanks so much. And we look forward to talking to you again.
Really enjoyed it, Kim. I look forward to coming back.
Thanks, John. And thanks, everybody, for joining us on Logistics Executive TV.